Traffic swallowed me whole, minute by suffocating minute. Downtown Los Angeles gridlock solid. My phone buzzed. Casting closes in 10 minutes. My stomach dropped instantly. I abandoned the rideshare and sprinted through crowded Los Angeles sidewalks, breathless. The studio doors were locked tight when I finally arrived. Panting. Everyone had already left. The hallway lights were going dark. Except one woman. Still sitting there alone. Patiently waiting for me. "You're an hour late," she said. "I know," I whispered back. Ashamed. She smiled softly. I waited anyway. My heart simply stopped beating. My name is Jordan Reyes, 29 years old. An actress who had spent 6 years chasing small roles across Los Angeles without ever landing anything that truly mattered to me. That single afternoon reshaped my entire future. Though I couldn't yet understand that missing one casting call would become the beginning of the most important story of my life. The woman introduced herself as Emery Voss, the director casting for an independent film about grief and second chances in small-town America. She apologized for the empty room, explaining she'd sent everyone else home an hour ago but stayed anyway, unwilling to leave without meeting me. I stammered through an excuse about the 405 freeway, but Emery simply waved it away, saying Los Angeles traffic owed no apologies to anyone. She handed me the script pages right there in the hallway, asking if I'd read for the lead role standing under flickering fluorescent lights. My voice shook through the first few lines, but something in Emery's steady gaze made the fear quietly dissolve as I kept going. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, studying me like she recognized something familiar in my face. "There's an honesty in how you carry sadness," she finally said, closing her notebook without writing anything down. She asked me to grab coffee nearby to discuss the role further, and I agreed before my brain could catch up with my mouth. Over lukewarm coffee at a diner on Sunset, Emery talked about the film's themes of loss with an intensity that surprised me. I found myself watching her hands more than listening to her words, noticing the way she avoided eye contact when she mentioned her past. By the time we said goodbye that night, she hadn't officially offered me the part, but something between us had already begun. I walked to my car replaying every sentence, wondering why one stranger's attention could rearrange an entire evening so completely. 2 days later, Emery's assistant called to invite me back for a final callback alongside 3 other actresses competing for the same role. I recognized one of them instantly, Priya Malhotra, an actress I'd known since acting classes years ago, whose smile had always felt slightly too sharp. Priya congratulated me on the callback with a hug that lasted a beat too long, whispering that she'd wanted this role for over a year. During the callback, Emery watched me more closely than the others, occasionally jotting notes while barely glancing at Priya's performance at all. A week later, my agent called screaming with excitement. I had booked the lead role in Emery's film, titled Quiet Harbor. I called my best friend Dana first, then sat alone on my apartment floor crying tears I hadn't expected to fall so easily. On the first day of rehearsal, Emery greeted me with a quiet smile that felt different from how she greeted everyone else in the room. She pulled me aside privately to walk through my character's backstory, speaking with a tenderness that made the fictional grief feel startlingly real. Over the following weeks, our rehearsals often ran late, the two of us staying behind long after the rest of the cast had gone home. I learned Emery had grown up in Ohio, the daughter of a factory foreman who never understood her love of filmmaking or, later, her love of women. She learned I had grown up in Savannah, Georgia, raised in a strict Baptist household where certain truths about myself stayed locked away for years. We traded small confessions carefully, like two people testing ice before deciding whether it would hold their combined weight. One evening she caught me humming an old gospel hymn between takes, and her expression softened into something unexpectedly wistful and far away. "My mother used to sing that," she said quietly, then changed the subject before I could ask anything further about her family. I noticed she never mentioned a partner, past or present, and something in me hesitated to ask, afraid of what silence might reveal. "Priya," cast as my character's estranged sister, began needling me during breaks about how much attention the director paid me personally. "Careful," she said one afternoon, only half joking. "Emery doesn't usually let actors get this close to her." I brushed off the comment, though it lodged itself somewhere I couldn't quite shake for the rest of that day's filming. On a night shoot along the Santa Monica Pier, Emery and I sat on cold concrete steps waiting for the fog machine to cooperate. She offered me her jacket without asking, draping it over my shoulders while pretending to study her shot list instead of me. "Thank you for waiting that day," I said suddenly, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "Nobody's ever waited for me like that." She looked at me then, really looked, and said, "I think I knew you were worth waiting for before you even walked in." Neither of us said anything else, but the silence between us felt charged, full of something neither of us was ready to name yet. Weeks passed in a blur of early call times, script revisions, and stolen glances I told myself I was only imagining. I started noticing the little things, how Emery always ordered my coffee order without asking, how she remembered every small detail I mentioned once. Dana teased me relentlessly over the phone, insisting I talked about my director more than any actress should talk about anyone professional. "I don't know what this is," I admitted to her one night, staring at my ceiling long after our call ended. But I knew exactly what it felt like: terrifying, thrilling, and impossible to ignore no matter how hard I tried. One Sunday, Emery invited me to her house to run lines away from the noise of the set, and I said yes immediately. Her home was smaller than I expected, filled with framed film stills and one photograph she quickly turned face down when I looked too closely. I asked about the photograph, and her jaw tightened before she simply said, "Someone I used to love." "It's a long story." I didn't push, though curiosity gnawed at me the entire evening as we cooked dinner together in her cramped, cheerful kitchen, over pasta and cheap red wine. I finally told her the truth I'd never said aloud to anyone in this industry. I was gay. Emery set down her fork slowly, studying my face for a long moment before saying, "Thank you for trusting me with that." "Does it change anything?" asked, my voice smaller than I intended, bracing myself for an answer I couldn't predict. "Only that I understand you a little better now," she said gently, and something in my chest finally loosened after years of guarding it. That night, walking me to my car, she lingered at the door a beat too long before saying goodnight and stepping back inside. I sat in my car for 10 minutes afterward, hands on the wheel, wondering if I'd imagined the way she'd looked at my mouth. The next week on set, our hands brushed passing a prop coffee cup, and neither of us pulled away as quickly as we should have. Priya noticed everything, watching us with narrowed eyes that made me increasingly uneasy about how obvious we might have become. During a break, Emery pulled me into an empty trailer to discuss a scene, then stood closer than any script discussion required. "Jordan," she started, then stopped, searching for words that seemed to catch somewhere behind her teeth before she could release them. "I haven't let myself feel anything like this in 2 years, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Before I could respond, an assistant knocked, calling her back to set, and the moment dissolved into the chaos of production. That night I couldn't sleep, replaying her unfinished sentence over and over until the words blurred into something like hope. A few days later, after wrapping a difficult emotional scene, Emery walked me to my car in the empty studio parking lot. Under the flickering security light, she reached up and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, hand trembling slightly. Then she kissed me, soft and hesitant at first, like she was asking a question my whole body had already answered. We pulled apart slowly, both of us breathless, staring at each other under that buzzing parking lot light like the world had shifted. "I shouldn't have done that," Emery said immediately, panic flooding her expression. "You work for me. It complicates everything." I told her I didn't care about complications, that this felt more honest than anything I'd experienced in years, but she still looked afraid. We agreed to keep whatever this was quiet, at least until filming wrapped. Terrified of what a scandal could do to both our careers, secrecy became its own strange language between us. Coded texts, careful distance on set, stolen moments in empty hallways after everyone left. I told Dana everything, swearing her to secrecy, and she listened with wide eyes before saying, "Jordan, please be careful with your heart." My mother called that same week, asking when I'd finally bring home a nice young man to meet the family at Thanksgiving. I deflected, as always, feeling the familiar weight of unspoken truth pressing harder against my chest than it ever had before. Meanwhile, Priya grew colder, watching Emery and me with a calculating expression that made the set feel smaller and more dangerous each day. One evening she cornered me by the craft services table and said, "I know what's going on. Everyone will eventually, you know." I denied everything, my voice too fast and too high, and Priya only smiled like she'd already won some private argument. That night, I asked Emery directly about the photograph she'd hidden, needing to understand the shadow that sometimes crossed her face without warning. She finally told me about Claire, her partner of 6 years, who had died suddenly of an aneurysm 2 years earlier at only 34. "I stopped directing for a year after that," Emery admitted, staring at her hands. "This film is the first thing I've finished since." I realized then why she'd waited for me that first day. Something about my audition had reminded her painfully of Claire's own warmth. The weight of that truth scared me more than I expected, wondering if I was falling in love with her or with a memory. "Am I just a reflection to you?" I asked one night, unable to hold the question back any longer despite my fear of her answer. Emery reached for my hand, holding it firmly. "You're not her replacement, Jordan. You're the first person who's made me want to live again." I wanted to believe her completely, but doubt lingered quietly, a small crack I couldn't quite seal no matter how much I tried. Production grew more demanding as the studio pushed for an earlier release date, adding pressure that strained everyone's patience, including our fragile new bond. One afternoon, an executive producer visited set and made an offhand comment about keeping the film's image clean and commercially safe. Emery's face tightened, but she said nothing, and I understood immediately that our relationship existed inside dangerous, unspoken boundaries at work. That night she apologized for staying silent, admitting she was terrified the studio would pull funding if rumors about her personal life spread. I told her I understood, though privately I wondered how long I could keep hiding something that felt too important to hide. Priya's behavior grew increasingly erratic, missing marks intentionally during scenes, then blaming the confusion loudly on my supposed lack of focus. During one heated exchange, she snapped, "Maybe if you weren't so busy sleeping with the director, you'd remember your blocking." Everyone froze. The room went silent. Emery stepped forward calmly, saying only, "That's enough, Priya," before quietly calling for a 15-minute break. I fled to my trailer, hands shaking, humiliated and terrified that the secret we'd guarded so carefully had just been detonated publicly. Emery followed a few minutes later, closing the door softly behind her. "I'm sorry. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen." "Are you ashamed of me?" asked, tears finally breaking through, all the fear I'd swallowed for weeks spilling out at once. "Never," she said fiercely, kneeling in front of me. "I'm afraid for you. For your career. Not because I'm ashamed of loving you." The word loving hung between us, unplanned and enormous, and for a moment neither of us seemed to know what to do with it. I went home that night to find my mother had left 3 missed calls and a voicemail asking if everything was okay. I called her back, and somehow, exhausted and raw, I found myself telling her the truth about who I really was. There was a long silence on the line before she said, "I need time, Jordan," and hung up without saying goodbye. I sat on my kitchen floor for an hour afterward, phone in hand, feeling more alone than I had in years despite everything gained. Emery came over unannounced that night, having sensed something was wrong through a single unanswered text, and simply held me without asking questions. "You don't have to explain anything right now," she whispered into my hair. "I'm just here. That's all that matters tonight." Over the following days, my mother's silence stretched painfully long, each unanswered message deepening a wound I thought I'd already made peace with. Meanwhile, word had somehow spread quietly through the crew about Priya's outburst, and whispers followed me between takes for the rest of the week. Emery called an emergency meeting with the cast, addressing the rumors directly and firmly, asking for basic professionalism regardless of anyone's personal life. Priya apologized publicly, though her eyes never met mine, and I understood the apology was for the producers, not genuinely for me. The studio executive returned the following week, this time requesting a private meeting with Emery that lasted nearly 2 uncomfortable hours. Emery emerged pale and quiet, refusing to discuss what was said, only mentioning that the film's final funding was under review. Pressed gently, worried, until she finally admitted the studio was threatening to pull financing if any distracting controversy continued surrounding the production. "This film could be the reason we lose everything," she said bitterly. The same night it might have finally saved me from disappearing. I felt the crushing weight of responsibility settle over both of us, wondering if my presence in her life had become more curse than gift. That night, lying awake beside her, I made a quiet decision. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't let fear make me disappear from my own life. 2 days later, the studio officially pulled a significant portion of funding, citing creative differences as the public reason for their sudden withdrawal. Emery gathered the cast and crew, her voice steady despite visible exhaustion, announcing she would personally finance the remaining production out of savings. I confronted her privately that night, terrified she was sacrificing everything financially because of feelings for me she hadn't fully processed yet. "This isn't about you," she said, though her tone lacked conviction. "This film matters to me beyond anything happening between us." I wanted to believe that completely, but guilt gnawed at me, wondering if loving me had cost her the career she'd rebuilt from grief. A week later, an entertainment blog published a vague but pointed article hinting at a secret romance on the set of Quiet Harbor. My phone exploded with messages from friends, colleagues, and reporters, all asking questions I wasn't prepared to answer publicly yet. I immediately suspected Priya, remembering her earlier threat, and confronted her directly during a break, my hands shaking with barely controlled anger. She didn't deny it, only shrugging coldly. "You should have thought about consequences before you got involved with your director, Jordan." The betrayal cut deeper than I expected, not just professionally but personally, from someone I'd once considered a genuine friend in this industry. My mother saw the article too, and her next call was colder than silence, asking if I intended to flaunt this publicly now. "I'm not flaunting anything," I told her, my voice breaking. "I'm just finally being honest about who I've always been, Mom." She said she needed more time, longer this time, and the line went dead before I could say anything else in response. Production continued under a media spotlight neither Emery nor I had wanted, every glance between us scrutinized by tabloids hungry for confirmation. Emery grew withdrawn, working longer hours alone in editing, and I felt the distance growing even as we still shared the same bed at night. "Talk to me," I begged one evening, watching her stare blankly at a laptop screen instead of eating the dinner cooling between us. "I'm scared," she finally admitted. "Scared this will destroy everything I rebuilt after Claire. And scared it might destroy you too." I told her I wasn't afraid of the world knowing, only afraid of losing her to fear before we'd even had a real chance. The following week, a major entertainment outlet ran a full story, naming us both explicitly, with quotes from an anonymous set insider. I recognized Priya's phrasing immediately in the quotes, confirming what I already suspected but couldn't yet prove without risking further conflict. My agent called. warning that 2 potential future projects had quietly withdrawn interest, citing concerns about audience perception following the controversy. I sat with that news for days, wondering if being honest about myself had just quietly ended the career I'd spent years building. Emery found me crying in her kitchen that night, and instead of comforting words, she simply sat beside me in heavy, understanding silence. "I won't ask you to hide again," she finally said. "But I also won't blame you if this becomes too much to carry." Her words felt like both permission and warning, and for the first time, I genuinely considered whether I should walk away to protect us both. I called Dana that night, sobbing, asking if I was foolish for risking everything for someone I'd only known for a few months. "You're not foolish," Dana said firmly. "You're finally living honestly. That's never foolish, even when it's terrifying." Jordan. The film's remaining shoot days grew tense, Emery pushing herself relentlessly, directing scenes about grief that mirrored our real, unraveling situation too closely. During the film's climactic scene, about a woman choosing between safety and love, I broke down mid-take, unable to separate fiction from my own fear. Emery called cut immediately, rushing to me, forgetting the crew entirely as she held my face and asked if I was okay. "I don't know if I can do this anymore," I admitted quietly, meaning both the scene and everything happening around us that week. She pulled me aside, away from curious eyes, and said, "Then we stop. Right now. Nothing about this film matters more than you." That declaration, witnessed by half the crew, effectively confirmed publicly what tabloids had only speculated, and something in me finally felt strangely, terrifyingly free. The remaining days of filming continued under quiet solidarity from most of the cast, though Priya kept her distance, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. My mother finally called again, 2 weeks after the article, her voice tired but softer than before. "I saw the interview," she said. An entertainment journalist had asked Emery directly about our relationship, and she'd answered honestly, calling me the reason I remembered how to hope. My mother admitted she'd cried watching it, though not entirely from anger. "I don't understand everything," she said, "but I don't want to lose you." It wasn't full acceptance, but it was a door left open instead of slammed shut, and I clung to that small mercy gratefully. Meanwhile, financial pressure on the film intensified as Emery's personal savings dwindled faster than anticipated, with post-production costs mounting weekly. An anonymous benefactor reached out through her agent, offering emergency funding, though the terms remained mysterious and the identity strangely withheld for weeks. Emery grew suspicious, refusing the offer initially, worried it was another trap disguised as generosity from someone hoping to control the film's message. I encouraged her to at least meet the benefactor, reasoning we had little left to lose given how precarious the production had already become. The meeting revealed a stunning truth. The mysterious donor was Claire's estranged sister, who had seen the news coverage and reached out quietly. She explained that Claire had always dreamed of Emery finishing a meaningful film, and losing her hadn't erased that hope from the family entirely. Emery wept openly for the first time I'd witnessed, decades of grief and guilt finally finding somewhere honest to land after years of silence. "She would have loved you," Claire's sister told me gently, squeezing my hand. "Not instead of her." Alongside everything Emery still carries, with funding secured and the truth finally spoken aloud, the final weeks of production felt lighter, like a held breath finally releasing. But one obstacle remained unresolved: Priya, whose betrayal still lingered unaddressed, threatening to resurface before the film's premiere could ever happen safely. 2 weeks before the premiere, Priya requested a private meeting, appearing at my apartment unannounced, looking smaller and more uncertain than I'd ever seen her. "I owe you an apology," she said immediately, voice trembling. I was jealous and scared, and I let that turn into something cruel. She admitted she'd been quietly struggling with her own sexuality for years, and watching my honesty had frightened her more than she'd expected. I attacked what I couldn't admit about myself, she confessed, tears finally falling. I'm sorry it cost you so much, Jordan. I didn't fully forgive her that night. But something in her honesty softened the anger I'd carried for weeks into something more like understanding. The premiere date arrived faster than expected. The film finally complete after months of turmoil, funding crises, and quiet, hard-won personal victories. I stood backstage in a borrowed dress, hands trembling, watching Emery adjust her tie while trying to appear far calmer than she felt. Whatever happens tonight, she said, taking my hand, I need you to know this film exists because you waited for me too. Eventually, the theater filled with industry names, journalists, and curious strangers, all eager to witness the film that controversy had made impossible to ignore. Midway through the screening, I felt Emery's hand find mine in the darkness, squeezing gently during the scene that mirrored our own real story. When the credits rolled, the theater erupted into applause that lasted longer than either of us expected, tears streaming freely down both our faces. During the Q&A, a journalist asked bluntly about our relationship, and this time, neither of us hesitated or looked away from the question. I love her, Emery said simply, into the microphone, in front of hundreds of strangers and cameras capturing the moment permanently online. The audience erupted again, this time softer, warmer. And I felt something inside me finally settle after months of fear and hiding. Near the exit afterward, I spotted a familiar figure standing awkwardly near the lobby doors. My mother, dressed carefully, clutching her purse nervously. She'd flown across the country without telling me, sitting quietly through the entire screening from the back row, unnoticed until that moment. I needed to see it for myself, she said, voice shaking. Who you are. What you built. I needed to understand it properly. I braced myself for judgment, but instead she pulled me into a tight, unfamiliar hug, whispering that she was proud of my courage. I don't understand everything yet, she admitted against my shoulder. But I understand that you're happy, and that has to be enough for now. I introduced her to Emery, watching two nervous, careful people extend cautious kindness toward each other for my sake. And it felt like victory. Later that night, reviews began appearing online, calling Quiet Harbor a quietly devastating masterpiece, and praising performances critics called achingly authentic. Awards buzz followed within days, industry insiders whispering about nominations for both the film and my performance, opportunities I'd never dared imagine before. Priya reached out again, this time publicly acknowledging her mistakes in an interview, using her own story to encourage compassion for others still hiding. I finally forgave her fully, understanding that her cruelty had come from a fear I recognized painfully well from years of my own hiding. My career, rather than ending as I'd once feared, expanded in ways I never anticipated, with directors specifically seeking out my honest, grounded presence. Emery and I moved in together that spring, blending her framed film stills with my own collection of theater programs and old scripts. We kept Claire's photograph displayed openly now, no longer hidden. A quiet acknowledgement of love that had shaped Emery long before I arrived. My mother visited twice that year, each trip a little easier than the last, her questions shifting slowly from confusion toward genuine curiosity. Thanksgiving, she finally asked Emery to pass the potatoes, an unremarkable request that somehow meant more to me than any grand speech could. Emery began developing a new film, one about hope rather than grief, inspired partly by the strange, unlikely way we had found each other. I read for the lead role, and this time, there was no traffic, no chaos, no fear. Only certainty as I walked through the door. You're early, Emery said, smiling from behind her desk, echoing the words that had once nearly ended before they'd truly begun. I didn't want to keep you waiting again, I said, and she laughed, pulling me close despite the office door standing wide open. We married the following autumn in a small backyard ceremony. Dana as my witness, Claire's sister seated proudly in the front row beside my mother. Standing there, surrounded by people who had once seemed impossible to gather in one place, I understood how far both of us had traveled. The traffic jam that once felt like the worst afternoon of my life had become, quietly and completely, the beginning of everything that mattered most. I used to believe missing that casting call was the greatest failure of my career. A mistake I'd spend years quietly regretting in private. Instead, it became the moment someone chose to wait for me, teaching me that the right person will always stay long after everyone else has gone. Andy.